This week, Jason Lassourreille from Sophos is with us to discuss MDRs and self-sabotage. Then Chris Sanders from Applied Network Defense joins us to talk about SecOps, training practitioners, and detection woes. Finally, in the enterprise security news, we've got funding, we've got acquisitions, we've got breaches. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll throw your phone across the room. Gmail really wants to make sure you're you. CISA really wants to help out open source and public utilities. Vendors are hiring. Brazil might have the most expensive breach ever, and the government did it to itself on purpose. Why are you logging into production hosts? Modern cars are privacy nightmares, detecting deepfakes, and cloning yourself. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, F-O-R-T-R-A. If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Sober Day. This is episode 331, recorded on Thursday, September 14th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the acolyte of Apple, the Prince of Poutine, the most apologetic CISO, and my favorite emergency co-host, Guillaume Ross.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm in an office for the first time since probably like 2019 or something. So, weird podcast setup for today, but super happy to be here.
Yeah, very happy for you to be here. And it's it's interesting. I don't know if it's intentional that National Sober Day is a couple days before the keg tapping ceremonies for Oktoberfest, but that seems like it couldn't be coincidence.
I'm just drinking water. We have a really good water machine over here.
Yep, same. Drinking water. There's nothing wrong with being sober, even if it's for one day or a week or all the time. But yeah, it's good to have days that make you think about hitting the reset button on things. Quick announcement here. Join our Discord channel to chat with our hosts, ask questions, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite. And just a quick note there, we have a bot that will copy your comments from YouTube, Twitch, LinkedIn, or any of the other places that we're live. So you can send something in the Discord right now and I'll see it. And it will distract me from what I'm saying. Don't abuse it, please.
You're setting yourself up for getting trolled right now. I love it.
I know. I'm already regretting saying that, but we'll see. We'll see. It's always fun to have an active audience, live audience. So this interview is sponsored by Sophos, and I love the title of today's topic is MDRs and self-sabotage. We're excited to have Jason Lassourreille, senior engineer from Sophos, with us today. Jason has been in the tech industry for 15 years and 5 of those at Sophos. He currently acts as a technical resource for new and existing customers. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are thrilled to have you here. Yeah. So, an interesting topic, and kind of building on a previous episode we have. If you go back to episode 321, we had a great discussion about managed detection and response. When we say MDR, that's what that's an acronym for, with Andrew Mundell. So that's I assume you saw that episode, Jason, or
Absolutely.
maybe not?
Absolutely. And Andrew's one of my good friends, and I would even say mentor in a lot of ways.
Oh, excellent. So this is I love the position you're in, because you do get to see kind of where the rubber hits the road quite a bit. The real problems customers are trying to solve. It seems like it would be a very satisfying role to be in, because you kind of get that full life cycle, that full loop of, okay, hey, we've got a problem, and then you tell them, how you can help them solve that issue. And either they do or they don't, but you get the feedback. You're not just like throwing code into the void and hoping people are enjoying the product.
Well, in past roles that I've been in, I've seen a lot of shelfware, right? They buy a product to meet a solution, or they're, hitting a checkbox. It's nice to be able to not only position a solution, but also follow up with them to make sure that it's doing its job, making sure that they're leveraging it to its full capabilities. And making sure they're not putting themselves in a position that undermines their investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great topic to talk about today, because I think there are a lot of good products there. I was actually involved. My good friend Javad Malik did a report on shelfware back in 2014, when we were both co-workers at 451 Research. We were both industry analysts there. And we did a survey where we surveyed both buyers and sellers. And it was interesting seeing where the fingers were pointed at each other. And when we asked a question, why does stuff end up on the shelf? And the vendors are like, well, the customer's not listening to us, and blah, blah, blah. And the customer saying, well, this thing is impossible to implement, and the supports that. It was just great kind of seeing the gripes aimed at each other. But you got kind of a sense for, okay, clearly a lot of it's communication, and a lot of it's, I think positions like yours, making sure that you've got, folks on the team that are there when the customer needs assistance, and kind of prevent them from foot gunning themselves.
Absolutely. And, a lot of the clients that I work with on a day-to-day basis, I tend to work with organizations that are sub 1,000 for the most part, sub 1,000 users. And the IT managers there, or the team, tends to be very limited. And I tend to work with a lot of people who are the IT manager, the storage admin, the network admin, the server admin, and the janitor on nights and weekends, right? So they're trying to do some really complex security protection, and they're trying to implement some tools, oftentimes to meet compliance or cyber risk insurance needs. And they're also still trying to do their day-to-day errands, and something has to be backburnered. Unfortunately, it winds up being security often. MDR can help that, but it's still something that people have to stay on top of and make good choices when they're working throughout their day.
Do you feel like, because it's MDR as opposed to, selling just traditional antivirus or EDR on its own, because there's more of a service component to it, people tend to deploy it and keep using it and making sure that it's in a decent state of, coverage of their environment and all that than they would if it was only EDR that they bought?
That's a great question. I think managed detection and response really drives conversations with IT, teams and our teams, because we're giving them continued communication. And really, this is true for a lot of MDRs out there. But speaking from experience, because we're giving them continued communication, we're giving them reports on their overall health and overall positioning, because we're trying to interact with them around suspicious behavior, it is more top of mind. With traditional endpoint security, the biggest thing that I hear is, oh, it's working great. I haven't had an alert in years. That's not necessarily a sign of something working. I do a lot of health checks and working with organizations, look at their policies and their exclusions. And even just yesterday, I was talking to a client who hadn't touched their policies since 2018. And I know for a fact they're not the same organization they were back then.
Yeah, and these exclusions, you always add new ones. You never remove the old ones, and first thing you know, it's been 17 years and the C drive is excluded.
Right. I've run into C drive exclusions. Doing some investigation, we feel it might have been an employee who was a little bit unhappy with their organization before leaving, but I've seen that. And with Sophos, we do have a health check section that can show them dangerous exclusions and policy creations that might put them at risk. But a lot of people don't look at that consistently either. What they try to do is address whatever alert is top of mind now. And that alert could be something from their firewall. It could be an alert from their endpoint, but it could just as easily be an executive whose, Mac Mini is acting funny, right? It could be someone who's having some issues with one of the tools that they need, and security gets pushed farther back. I've seen a lot of exclusions for products that don't exist any longer. The company was acquired and sunset years ago, but we still have an exclusion in there. And that doesn't provide a huge risk. But when we're seeing more of these living off the land techniques from attacks, and we're seeing legitimate tools being used in malicious ways, or even tools that we know have vulnerabilities that aren't being patched any longer, it opens up a larger door than people expect. And the first place that organizations go for exclusions are global exclusions. They don't do policy exclusions, even though they're available, right? And those are the exclusions that can pertain to individual users or group of users or individual computers and groups of computers, limiting that exclusion scope. They tend to go for the easiest button or the easiest tool. It really becomes a hammer most of the time. They do a global exclusion that covers every machine, and they don't understand what the scope of that exclusion really means to them.
Is that one of the things that's missing here? Because something I got kind of excited about was breach and attack simulation tools, and I think they kind of ended up being more noisy than I hoped they would be. But that hits me as an example of something where if you make too big of an exclusion, all of a sudden you've got some tooling that automatically checks to see if you're actually going to catch lateral movement or something like that. And a configuration change shoots you in the foot, and it comes up and says, "Hey, look, now I can do this, and I can see your detection environment is blind to it." Is that something that you guys would help them with by manually doing that, or do you have customers that have breach and attack simulation products that do this?
Well, with our solution, what we do is we do look for overly broad exclusions and specific tools that are risky. One of the biggest ones is globally excluded PS exec and PS kill, right? Legitimate tools.
Oh, geez.
Right? For the people who know, they're used more often for malicious activity than they are legitimate activity any longer.
Yeah.
Right.
I
exactly.
usually tell people if PS exec works in your environment from one laptop to another, you have a lateral movement problem. Like, it's really good at knowing that there's something that needs to be locked down a little more.
Right. So we notify those. That's part of our standard operating procedure. But there's a limit to that scope, right? If we start alerting on everything that's dangerous, we start running into some problems. We can't always limit PowerShell because organizations live on PowerShell executions and they live on their scripts. And we can decide certain scripts might be malicious, but other scripts are suspicious. Now, MDR can help, but if we're excluding PowerShell from global detection, it makes it that much harder. We have to start inferring activity instead of directly observing it. Or if they are excluding a drive because someone said it was slow at one point. Well, great. Is it still slow? What year was that? And what were we doing, or what were you doing that was causing that slowdown? Was it because it was a driver conflict with an application you're using? Was it because you're using a lot of IOPS on a physical spinning media? How can we identify what the root causes that is results from that without having to just exclude it? There are some really good tools out there that can help organizations identify, overly broad exclusions and specific types of applications. We're embedding a lot of that technology within our products. For instance, with InterceptX Advanced, our endpoint protection, we have a brand new feature set called Adaptive Active Adversary Protection. And that's designed specifically for living off the land techniques, unsigned EXEs and DLLs, that lol bin type of attack, where when we see that activity on a specific machine, we can enforce more restrictive policies temporarily, blocking that activity, and if not, kicking them out of the environment, delaying the attack so that it gives time for the incident response team, whether it's ours or the client's, to take action. And if that attacker tries to pivot, we can then put some additional exclusions in place, trying to stop them at every turn. And that's been really
so that's
effective.
much more dynamic than what people are usually used to. I'm wondering, I've worked in a bunch of different types of companies, so I've seen, environments where, there's a lot of false positives. Why? Because, I don't know, some engineering team actually makes Windows software. We still have a 32-bit version of something, actually looks super suspicious when they do a local build, that type of stuff. But I was wondering, you probably have much more visibility into a lot of different environments. What are the environment types where you need the most custom configurations? Is it ICS? Is it manufacturing? Like what type of environment requires the most fine-tuned deployments?
That's a great question. There's a few organizations that tend to leave themselves open to risk more than others. I find like manufacturing and like printing and production tend to rely on really old devices because that came with whatever type of machinery they were using, right? So I walk into environments quite often where they've got a Windows 7 device that's connected to a special piece of hardware. That Windows 7 device is still on the network and they can't touch it because that's the only copy of this software that will run this machine. So then, and Windows 7 hasn't been supported in quite a while now, and we've recommended against having it. But now we have to have something else in place, right? Is it through a network detection response option? Are we looking through just firewall policies and trying to segment it as much as we can? Like, what are some of the other steps that we can take to mitigate that? And then also it's the development teams. I find that organizations that have a more sophisticated dev team, but are trying to run lean and mean, tend to do riskier things. A lot of unsigned code, a lot of applications that they custom created, but they never validated the integrity of it. They never validated what else could happen by leveraging this tool. And I see a lot of abuse with that out there. And then it's also just the organizations that are where they acquiesce to their clients' demands. That's probably one of the biggest things. Someone within that organization was squeaky enough to have something turned off, whether they were turning off certain detections because that user just complained so often, even though they were engaging in risky behavior, they had to do something to, allow them. That user could be an executive. It could be someone who's just valuable enough and noisy enough that we're having to make these changes. And instead of doing it for that individual and then monitoring it with an EDR, right, or an XDR tool, extended detection and response, they create a global exclusion and open up a larger window than they need to.
Would these be the environments where you would use these more dynamic policies to kind of, sometimes these exclusions, there's definitely a need for it, right? Like you said, how they buy 100%. Manufacturing hardware and it comes with like this weird Windows 98 machine or whatever. But then can you use these more dynamic rules to kind of mitigate the risk that you're creating by having these exclusions? So your day-to-day operational mode would be a little bit more open, but based on detections, you can tighten it down a little bit more. So
you can reduce risk.
Best of both worlds scenario.
Yeah, I would caution against mitigate risk. You can reduce risk, and I think a great strategy is identifying what the level of risk an organization can withstand is. Right, a lot of organizations deem a certain level of risk acceptable. And some organizations are highly risk averse. So for those organizations that are really risk averse, I don't think there's going to be a middle ground for some of those. But organizations can withstand some level of risk. Having these types of policies, right? The adaptive active adversary detection would detect things like lateral movement. It would detect an eternal blue attack, right? Coming from a machine that's not protected. We would detect some odd packet behavior. Leveraging things like tools like a network detection and response device, where we're looking at just the network traffic east-west in an environment to see if we're having odd connections. That can all reduce risk, but at the end of the day, if the malicious behavior looks legitimate enough, it becomes difficult for us to find it until they do something that looks risky, right? If it is, if we're not looking for login behaviors, if we're not looking for login locations, if we're looking at, things that tend to look normal for an organization, it becomes a bigger haystack for us to find the needle.
Yeah, so I wanted to, talking about those exclusions, how specific can you get with those? Because your example with PSExec, maybe you have some of those PowerShell scripts are leveraging PSExec for things, or administrators are manually leveraging them. And, but the way that PSExec is used, could be something that you could set some exclusions around if you could get specific enough, right? Like PSExec being executed by a NetLogon script or a PowerShell script or something like that's very different than like as a child process of Microsoft Word, for example. Are the tools nuanced enough that you can create exclusions like that, and you can say PSExec when it looks like an admin is okay, but any other use of it, is going to look fishy.
Yeah, tied to specific users, tied to specific login credentials, right? Tied to specific devices. You can, limit it to that. And even with an exclusion, just to be clear, if Word is executing something like that, right? If it's running like an MSHTA and it's downloading a payload, which is leading to a PowerShell execution, we see that. One of the biggest things that I recommend to an organization is if they're starting to move towards an endpoint detection response solution or extended detection response, depending on your marketing, and they're not quite looking for full managed detection response, and they're doing it in-house, the biggest thing is to leverage their EDR queries to monitor what those scripts are, to identify what normal looks like, and understand how to find anomalies, right? If you're seeing a base 64 encoded PowerShell execution, that should raise a lot of red flags. If you're seeing even just potentially benign commands, right? A lot of who is or a lot of host name type of commands done in a time frame around certain other executions, that should also be a red flag. You should be able to maintain visibility even if you've had to exclude protection. And that's one of the things that we really try to preach is if you're going to do an in-house security operations center, or even if you're leveraging an EDR with a small team, maintain visibility over that which is critical, even if you've had to exclude some of the protection. And it's all about balancing that risk reward.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I imagine, that's a trick, right? I used to call this the customization tax, where each environment is so different. I think that's where a lot of stuff ended up shelfware is they didn't anticipate or have, especially with the companies you're talking about, 1,000 employees or less. They didn't have the time to go through and do all this detection engineering and set all this custom stuff up for their environment. Because what looks weird in one environment is totally normal in another, right?
Absolutely. Are you able to hear me still?
Yep, no problem.
Okay, because I have 3 black monitors for some reason, and I don't know why. So I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Okay. So, yeah, that is a big thing, right? Is each organization is unique and different, and it becomes, and this is what makes it difficult from an MDR or even any security operations center standpoint, right? Is how do we identify what looks normal within this organization, and how do we make that generalized enough that most organizations can get value in it? So what we tend to do is have an understanding of what malicious looks like, confirmed malicious, whether it's living off the land techniques using specific applications like TeamViewer, or we're seeing, some unsigned DLLs or EXEs that are going through, or if we're seeing, some RDP sessions that shouldn't be created. Identify what known malicious looks like and have that built into the product. Protect as much as we can. Then layer on the human side of things. Although AI is fantastic, we use AI in a lot of our products, AI is still really limited. I think humans are still better able to recognize abnormalities. And you'll find that a lot of organizations, their IT department has a hunch when something's going wrong. They know it doesn't feel quite right. And it could be as simple as, the fan's noise in my server room is slightly higher pitched than normal, right? They tend to know their environment.
Good at detecting patterns, spotting patterns, right? Like that's something that our brains are good. Yeah.
Yeah. So having that sit-down session with an organization, and we're having them work with you to understand what normal looks like, and trying to put in place some protections and some reporting so that they can keep an eye on that normal and leverage that innate human benefit.
Yeah. So speaking of human benefit, so your role, I'm curious. You're talking about somebody still having exclusion, or haven't checked their exclusion since 2017, 2018. Are you reaching out to customers proactively, like looking for things systematically, saying, "Hey, this looks like configuration hasn't changed in years. We should probably chat with them and take a look at this," or is it more reactive, or is it a mix of both when you work with customers?
It's a mix of both, right? So we do have some things in place to notify us early in an attack process if we're seeing behaviors on an endpoint that shouldn't be there, and we can reach out and say, "Hey, we're seeing something suspicious. We think you might be under attack. Can you investigate it?" Even with our endpoint product, that's something that we can do. But really, we're trying to, and Sophos has been doing this for a couple of years now, we're really trying to change the paradigm and not just be there at the time of sale, at the time of renewal. Having that relationship with organizations where every quarter we're scheduling a cadence to talk to an organization about how their environment is currently working, what are they seeing, review new features that have launched that might address concerns that they have, address complaints that they might have early in the cycle, and use that feedback to drive development and other things. Since Sophos goes directly through partners only and we don't sell direct, some of it is a little bit more reactive, where we're encouraging our partners to reach out and leverage their relationships. But a lot of it is us trying to schedule a normal cadence. Hey, customer, you purchased this 3 months ago. Were you successful in deployment? What are you liking about it? What don't you like about it? Do you want to have a quick call to validate that your deployment is in your best interest, that you don't think you have strong security, you have strong security? I've seen a lot of organizations that, they still treat it like a checkbox. I have an endpoint protection. I have, XDR tools or EDR tools. Great. How are you using them? We find that a lot of organizations that have EDR and XDR either rarely or never leverage queries to look in their environment. And a lot of it is because they don't know how to use it, and they're not actively leveraging their security tools. So that's where we have the conversation. Can we show you how to leverage those tools? Give you some training, help you think like, a security team. And if not, then maybe that's not the best solution if you have a high risk aversion.
Yeah, I mean, that can be challenging, right? Like when you've got 3 different tools that all have query languages, but they're all different languages, and they all have different data stores and table names and object names and stuff like that. I'm thinking, OS query versus Velociraptor versus Elastic. Like you almost need I can imagine people in a cubicle with just lines of cheat sheets with all the query languages surrounding them. So it can be challenging. I can totally get people not using it just because there's such a learning curve to get over.
Well, and it reminds me very much of back in the day when, and not to call any manufacturers out, but when you would go from working on a Cisco switch and to another manufacturer's switch that swears that their code is Cisco compatible, right? And then you would find that there's nuances to commands that aren't quite right. And you're having to figure out, like, all right, how's the syntax slightly different? We've experienced stuff like this. It's starting to converge, I think, a little bit. And where we are seeing some benefit is MDR solutions that are bringing in third-party tools into the ecosystem. Several years ago, Sophos was very siloed in what our MDR can do. We were primarily looking at our tools. That has changed for quite a while now. We're able to ingest data from other tools, whether it be their firewalls, their NDR, their identity, their email security solution, pull in that event data, pull in that threat data, normalize it because no one, quantifies it the same way, and then start trying to identify those trends, those commonalities, and really look into their the security situation. Cybersecurity sprawl is real. A lot of organizations have 20 plus different tools from different manufacturers, and all of them have a different UI, a different syntax, leverage different queries. Heck, maybe they're on just a different version of OS query, and there's a new table versus an old table that they were used to. It gets complicated. So I think integrating is a big step in that direction.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, not to throw AI too much into the conversation here. I know there's a lot of hype, but one of the most compelling use cases I've seen is I've seen folks demonstrate with it, write me a Yara rule to check for this, this, and that. Or, even like very specific languages specific to one SIM vendor. I've seen where ChatGPT and other LLMs can perfectly format that for you. So maybe some of these LLMs could be, could be an interface for that, where, you're just telling them which system you want to query for this, and they're kind of that translation layer, that Babel fish, so to speak.
Nice reference. So
it is literally that, right?
Oh, exactly. Well, and I think you're onto something. That's probably where I'm most excited about AI. We've been leveraging AI to look for patterns and behaviors, and we're looking at it to find impersonation emails, or we're using it to identify new threats. I think the next spot for AI that's really interesting is really twofold. One, leveraging it to create queries for you, or create the code that you need. I know I leverage it for PowerShell scripts or SQL scripts all the time. My SQL programming is not great. So I definitely cheat in and review. But what I'm hoping for within the next couple of years, and I've seen some demos of it, there's been talk internally about it, and I've also seen some organizations at their conferences start to showcase this, is the natural language query. Right, where I can just ask a question, show me which interfaces are doing X, or show me what behavior is Y, and it does all of the back end for you. That's really exciting, because once we can make the complex code more approachable, we're going to have a higher rate of adoption. It's going to be, I think, the same impact as going from straight CLI to GUI. Now, I know there's still CLI purists, and I'm in terminal all the time on my Linux box, so I get it. But for vast adoption, moving from command line to GUI was revolutionary, even if at first it limited what we can do. Now it's ubiquitous. I think having that AI be able to do the natural language queries is really going to take it to that next step.
Yeah. And nothing ever really gets completely displaced, right? We still need command line. It's great for automation. Automating GUI is much harder. But I think for learning, it's also going to be important, right? So I don't want to turn this into a Jupyter One product pitch, but we actually release that. We have that natural language for saying, hey, this is what I want to know, and it'll convert it into the right query. So yeah, you can run it and then find out what you were trying to find out, but also that it helps you learn how you would query it directly, right? And which is at some point will allow you to customize it more, right? So if you want to learn to code like Python, ChatGPT is actually great for showing you examples and like coming up with pretty simple code blocks and all that. So if it speeds up the speed at which it improves the speed at which people can learn about security. Like for example, you want to look at a Windows machine and you want to know, did someone log in via remote desktop? If you do incident response all the time, you know exactly what event IDs you're looking for, right? But an LLM could tell you about that pretty easily.
Yeah, and I'm a strong proponent that anything that drives additional adoption and utilization is a good thing, right? As much as I love, API calls and command line and stuff, and there's always a place for that, but average Joe organization isn't doing that. they want to just be secure, and they want to be able to validate that things are working and question if something looks funny, is it something that's malicious? Now, MDR definitely helps with that, but at the end of the day, being able to do that in a really natural way, I think is going to drive better adoption and better utilization of the tools that they have.
It's probably for these organizations that are under 1,000 people that are not tech companies. This is probably not something that a lot of them want. But I feel like especially on the endpoint side, there's way less automation than on the server side, right? So there's a lot of companies now using tools like Terraform, trying to automate most of their back end, right? Like no touch ops, that kind of stuff. Are you starting to see people want to configure a tool like their EDR or their MDR using something like Terraform? So, someone can just have it as infrastructure as code. Someone makes a change, it gets approved, and it gets deployed? Or is that still maybe a little too modern for most of these organizations?
It's starting to get there, right? Tools like Ansible and stuff are starting to become more common tools. Sophos has our Sophos Factory product. We got it through an acquisition. We're initially leveraging it to help automate our internal MDR teams and processes, but we have a community edition, and we're launching it as an actual product. And we're starting to get people asking about it, trying it out and testing it. And we're seeing some decent adoption, even from a community version of the tool. I think we're going to move that way. Servers are much easier, right? Because you can eliminate the human element for the most part with a server, and having infrastructure as code is a little bit more elegant on the infrastructure side than it is going to be on the endpoint. You're always going to have some of those roadblocks of your unique endpoint user. But we're starting to see that, especially when it comes to automating response actions. Currently, if you have just straight EDR from any manufacturer, it's providing you information, but it's not giving you necessarily how to take those steps to do it. Whereas, some of the automation tools can. When I'm talking to clients about what their tools do for them, EDR is like if I dropped a truckload of tools in your garage and says, you know what, you've got everything that you need to dismantle, rebuild, and maintain a vehicle. Have at it. How many people can do that? MDR is that pit crew, right? That's monitoring an environment, that's telling you what's going to happen before it happens. You've got a vibration out of turn 2. We want to pull you in and change some tires, or we're noticing some odd wear here and there. We can pull you in, diagnose, repair, get you back out as quickly as possible, and maintain that level of control. But some organizations aren't looking for having that hosted, although we think a lot will move that direction. Having that automation will start to bridge that gap. But a lot of the organizations I talk to are probably a good 5-6 years from moving that way. They're still trying to get themselves leveraging just deployment tools, right? Deploying through group policy consistently, or using, PDQ deploy to push applications, or even do some patch management. They're still kind of in that infancy stage to full automation. But in the next 5+ years, we're definitely going to see an adoption of that.
So before we wrap up here, Jason, I want to get from you, maybe you can just kind of hit some highlights of some of the things where, clearly there's a lot of incremental improvements, you can see in your detection engineering and the work that you're doing with clients. But I suspect there's some big leaps, some big mistakes you can use, or that you can make that prevent you from getting anywhere. Right, like I think we've all heard implementation horror stories where IDSs are plugged into the wrong span port, or EDR never receives a policy, so it sits there with just with nothing to do. It's just running
I think my craziest one for that was asking for a hash to be allowed, and it became the only hash that was allowed. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of examples like that.
Yeah. So what are some of the common things that customers should be careful not to do that you see tripping people up right at the beginning of the process, that face plant right out the door?
So the first one is always test internally first. Have some machines that are running your normal workload that look like your average user, and make sure that you can successfully deploy and you can create strong exclusions, strong policies without having to risk the environment. I think a big thing that I see is acquiescing to all the end users' demands and not having set policies created to limit or restrict what people are able to do and bring into the organization. If you could manage the unexpected, then finding the suspicious becomes much more easy. And really what it is I think the biggest issue that I have, and I used to see this back in firewalls, where we have deployments that are in the base deployment. Now, for some tools, that's fine, but I've even seen firewalls that, they deployed a firewall, they have a firewall, the only policy in there is an allow any, and it's not restricting anything. Taking the time to not only deploy, but also validate, I think is huge. Making sure that you are getting that right telemetry, making sure it is blocking, making sure that you're able to get that visibility that you need without disrupting production. And just not everything needs to be a global exclusion. If you have a user leveraging, an access database on their endpoint, we don't need to globally exclude that location for all machines. Or if IT needs to leverage a tool like PSExec, make sure that you have it tied down to an individual user account. Make sure that admin account isn't a global admin account. And then leverage tools like EDR to monitor the use of that tool to see if you have any unexpected uses of it or unexpected code. If you have to exclude, please don't lose visibility, even if you've given up some protection. That would probably be the one thing that I talk about the most.
Yeah, very good advice. Yeah, and I suspect a lot of those kind of bad choices come due to pressure. Also, like a lot of pressure just to get somebody working, or to right. just fix something. And people know, if I go with the global, I that's the easy button. That'll get it done right now.
Yeah,
it these people off my back. So, I think then you kind of get into like having a culture that encourages you to do it the right way, even if that's going to take a little bit of extra time. And not everybody has that luxury, I don't think.
Absolutely. And if you have a partner that's willing to do the health checks with you, whether it's the manufacturer partner or someone that you work with or an MSP, take them up on it. Celebrate the victories where you have them. Have someone tell you that your policies are putting you in a good position, and take advice where you need to. I think having those relationships with those from which we've purchased products from is important, whether it's through Sophos or another manufacturer. Not just being a one and done relationship is really important in today's day and age. Monitor their blogs and their social media so that some of the things that they're looking out for and some of their recommendations. Maintain those lasting relationships with those partners that you've invested in, and try to take their advice wherever possible.
Well, excellent advice. Thank you, Jason, so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk SecOps and practitioner education with Chris Sanders from Applied Network Defense.